Budgets shouldn't just keep the lights on, they should foster momentum, enabling faster decisions, happier customers, and fewer surprise costs. Today, we are transforming tech budgets into business growth. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted with SST, the LinkedIn live show where we deep dive into the real, unfiltered world of IT, cybersecurity, and business technology. Brought to you by Secure Strategic Technology, we're here to cut through the noise, share expert insights, and tackle the challenges shaping the future of managed IT services. Live, raw, and unscripted. Joining me today are Bo Elson and Troy Tobin, who work together to help organizations turn strategies into meaningful technology investments, not just expenses. Welcome, gentlemen.
How's it going?
Good. I guess before we jump into today's episode, we'll just give a kind of a brief overview of kind of the areas we're going to touch on. The first segment is going to be around digital drag. What is it and the hidden costs associated with it? Then we'll move on to cost center versus growth enabler. Then we'll touch on the four-step budgeting framework that Bo likes to leverage with our clients. And then diving into making ROI real when it comes to technology budgeting. Does that sound fair?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So again, thanks for being here today. I think we have a lot of good information that for those watching the show. So I guess Bo, can you tell us a little bit about what digital drag is and what that terminology means, and why does it matter at budget time?
Yeah, I guess digital drag is kind of a new term that I've heard, but I kind of refer to it as kind of the overall soft cost of using technology. You know, what it is with the different pieces of technology that you have in place, from the software, hardware, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Like, what kind of impact does it have on overall operations and performance of staff? So, like, you know, the legacy tools, the old systems, manual workflows, the integrations, all of that kind of stuff, that just, it really increases the cost of support, right? It's a productivity drag from the employees. And so, you know, just looking at that digital drag or those soft costs, just making sure that, you know, when you're investing and prioritizing, that you're removing that drag, because that can provide some of the highest benefit for companies, because it's an overall capacity improvement, right, by getting rid of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to dive into I really like the legacy tools coupled with manual workflows. I mean, based on your role at SST as our VCIO, like, how many times do you encounter a new client during the onboarding process where there's these tools that just don't result in very good workflows? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
No, it's all the time. And a lot of that is just because there's no guidance when you're implementing tools. And so somebody got a piece of software, started using it for their job, and then just doesn't understand how it fits in the overall, you know, business operations. How do you get from A to Z producing those widgets? It's like, well, I do this job. So understanding how all that flows together and making sure, you know, the automation, the integrations, the efficiencies, those workflows are optimized, it's really going to perform significant benefit for the organization.
Yeah, and just one last thing before I got a follow-up question for you, Troy. But I know we at SST, we do a lot of alignment to the CIS framework. Mm-hmm. And then what comes to mind there, Bo, is, you know, 1 and 2, right? Hardware and software inventories. Yeah. And if we're doing these things, is that going to really help our position with regards to digital drag and legacy siloed tools?
Oh, absolutely. You kind of get a real handle on what's actually in use out there. It's eye-opening for a lot of customers. I mean, it's not an easy thing to go through and review. A lot of the hardware stuff is a lot easier because those are tangible pieces of equipment that people know they purchased. But software is one that, you know, there's free software out there. There's some freeware. There's, you know, other like business apps. There's add-ons. So there's just so much of different things that are happening in the environment that people may have developed their own workflows. So trying to get your arms around it and figuring out what is actually used, what's the best thing to invest in, does make a big improvement for customers. But it takes a lot to get to that inventory and really understand what you have out there, especially if you haven't been monitoring along the way.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for that. So, Troy, can you talk a little bit about hidden costs associated with legacy, outdated platforms and tools and those kinds of things?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, kind of goes into some of the tools and how people are working, but lost productivity is probably the number one thing. And that's going to come from either, something stopped working, so somebody can't do their job. That could be like a maintenance issue, or it could be inefficient process and procedures. Like talked about, so-and-so is doing it this way. Well, another employee decided this is the best way to do it, and not working as a cohesive team, is losing productivity. Delayed decision making can be another cost. Are we going to go to the cloud environment? Well, let's just keep it on-prem for another year. What are the costs associated with that? And risks of employees making errors, whether it be an accounting department or operations or manufacturing. What kind of costs is there? Does the cost of a manufacturing line shutting down ever get into the actual IT budget as this was a cost? Probably not, right? So those are some things to try and understand what the business needs and what those costs are, not just what my IT tech is. Talk about maintenance a little bit. The cost of maintaining older, storage or server technology goes up and up the older the equipment gets, to the point that it's not, there's no value in it anymore, right? It's time to move on to another device, and then figuring out, where is that? Is that the cloud? Is it another on-prem environment? So, but basically, all these soft costs that aren't actually on the IT lifecycle management plan, they accumulate each quarter, right? So, that stacking up throughout a course of a year or 3 years is really something that the leadership has to acknowledge.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I guess that's a really good segue into our next little discussion point here. I mean, so many budgets or budgeting processes are centered around, let's keep it running. Troy, what's a better frame of mind or a better mindset when it comes to technology budgeting?
Well, as pre-sales, I come into a lot of environments that either don't have a budget at all, or they have something. And whether the companies are working with internal IT staff or working with a partner, what I often see is the result of let's make sure we keep the ownership or leadership happy by keeping the budget in check, rather than actually understanding what the business needs to thrive and increase revenues and margins by embracing IT. So when I go into a some place that just basically has a list of hardware, maybe a list of software, and what's born on date, how much did it cost 4 years ago, what's the replacement, and there's no other consideration like tying the actual output applications and productivity to those assets, I know you're already in trouble, right? So that's pretty clear from that standpoint. Or you hear something, right? We want to do that, but we're not going to spend that much. Turning IT and technology into something that can increase the business rather than a cost center is a lot for some people to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I think it's more like, what's what's a better mindset when it comes to budgeting? Should we just be penny pinching, or should we be methodical, focusing on business outcomes? I mean, I guess what things specifically could you talk to with regard to being more aligned to business outcomes?
Yeah, like Bo's probably going to talk about this a little bit coming up here, but understanding that mapping from hardware to software, and then what those specific tools are doing to your bottom line, right? And then finding a way, whether it's your manufacturing, whether it's your ERP system, where are those dollars going? Where does it make sense to put the most dollars? And then how do we measure that, right? We have to be able to measure, if this goes out for 2 weeks, what is the cost of the company? What's the reputation? So aligning, whether it's your, customer retention and measuring that with CSAT scores, customer satisfaction, like tying all of those business objectives back to software and hardware, is what I think would make the most sense in, prioritizing those.
Yeah, and so not taking the approach of like, let's try to do the most cost-effective solution, having a holistic plan, not doing something, every 5 years, continuously improving is probably a good course of action. Making decisions off of data and planning with data. I mean, all these things are ultimately, that change, right, from a cost center to a growth enabler when we're talking about technology budgets.
And when we talk about those things, most companies that I go into, their operations aren't run that way, whether it's manufacturing or, their sales. A lot of times there's more focus put on those without tying it all back to what are the tools we need to actually deliver those, right? So they just think about it differently.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess moving on to the next segment here, Bo, can you talk a little bit about your approach with our clients when it comes to budgeting and kind of the steps you take?
Yeah, I mean, there are four big things. The first couple around like just understanding the environment, taking a look at the posture and having an inventory of the hardware, what software is being used, because a lot of that stuff you can just have some life cycle plans on there, and that's the easiest thing to do. And when we see customers with budgets, they're going to start with that of, you just have to have a planned replacement. So having that in front of you, it at least gets a starting point for like, what do I need to look for? This has been, I use this for 5 years. I'm planning to use this for 7 years. Maybe it's because of some accounting rules. Maybe it's just, business decision when you acquire the piece of hardware or software. But then knowing that's coming up and making sure then, the second part is, does it still align to the business goals? Like, why am I using that? It's due for replacement. Is that still the thing I need to be doing? So looking and making sure I'm going to do this because this is the right thing to do. Am I going to keep this in-house? I'm going to look for a cloud solution. Is there a better input device? Or do they have a different version of this? What other players are in this software space? Is it now time to evaluate something else? Making sure whatever you're going to invest aligns those business goals. You're going to have the outcomes that you want. And then also when you're looking at that, making sure you're prioritizing. Not all those investments need to be done. Maybe some of the things are just like, these are absolutely, 100%, we got to do, these 5 things that's going to consume X of our budget, but making sure it's not just like, okay, everything that we peppered on there, we're going to plan to do, understanding there's a priority to those replacements. So you can make sure that you're maximizing the spend with those dollars. And then the last part is just making sure you have some flexibility in there, right? That things change. IT changes quite frequently. Having a 1, a 3, a 5-year plan, certainly just with life cycle and in business objectives, you can have some things on there. But boy, I'll tell you, if you were planning on, budget what you're going to do in 2025 when you're in 2020, I'm sure you weren't planning for the AI revolution that we're experiencing right now. Now, how is that changing your budgeting plan, right? How is that changing your overall operations? Like, you got to have some flexibilities to revisit maybe decisions that were made like long-term of here's what we're doing. You got to be flexible, have it in mind for taking advantage of those opportunity surprises. So you have some dollars, you have some time to be able to maximize those investments too. And then the last thing I would say, kind of when we're looking at this spend and investments, one of the things that I know Troy, when he was talking about like looking at customers, like, are they a cost center or do they want to enable growth, is understanding kind of there's industry spend, based on revenue targets. So certain industries have to invest more in IT. It's just kind of the nature of how they leverage IT. There's going to be spend in there. And so making sure your spend is reasonable, right? One of the things is when we onboard all of our customers, one of the first questions I ask is annual revenue goals, right? We want to make sure with the spend in IT is appropriate for their strategic plan. And a lot of times we're seeing significant technology debt with customers just to kind of get them up to where we're mitigating a lot of those big risks, of significant failure, cybersecurity risk, but just making sure that's appropriate amount of spend. Sometimes we have to defer decisions, right? It's that impact, making sure, this is really important, but we don't have those dollars to spend on it. having those conversations, making sure that's part of the plan, and there's that committed investment. Like you don't have to go spend 100% of your overall revenue on this, but there's going to be certain thresholds that you can see, like, okay, people in my industry, this is how much they're investing. How can we like, IT is so much a part of every business these days. Like 10, 15 years ago, people could kind of neglect some of the technology, or maybe could in certain industries, and still be able to operate and be competitive. These days, IT needs to be part of what you're doing to really to operationalize like all of the efficiencies that you need. So just kind of ignoring it and not being willing to invest it, you're just going to find yourself in a deficit. It might not be this year, but in years to come, not having that plan is going to be problematic.
I just want to add to that. I mean, if you have internal IT and they're not at the table for these decisions, that needs to change, right? They need to understand, what makes your company tick as much as anybody. Or if you're working with a partner and they're not asking these questions, then you may not be with the right partner, right? Mm-hmm. That has to be part of it.
Well, it's like when you're reviewing financials and doing, financial budgeting for the next year. Does the CFO get to participate in all these high-level business decisions? Absolutely. It's no different from an IT perspective nowadays because of how immersive technology is in all of business. I would say, too, for us, like how we talk about proactive all the time, right? This is one of those proactive elements. It's not proactive maintenance or patching or things like that. It's, sorry, I have a pet digging on the carpet in my basement here. Hey, sir, can you please leave? You're not invited to the party. Please leave. Anyway, it's kind of like being proactive, right? Like this is one of those proactive things. Like business outcomes aligned to strategic planning, right? Being very intentful around this, using data to make these decisions, so that we're ultimately using technology to drive those business outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say too is some of these investments are actually cost avoidance. So much these days with cybersecurity risk or just operational risk, it's more about investing in IT to make sure you're avoiding those significant costs, either an operational perspective, cybersecurity perspective, and all of the challenges that those bring to the customers. Making sure you're addressing that also helps prevent those, he says, stay flexible, like having, be ready for those surprises. Well, you don't want those type of surprises. Those are the bad surprises. The other surprises you want is you just know like business opportunities may come up. So investing in IT is going to lower those, the potential expenses too.
Mm-hmm. Is there, I guess just to wrap this, framework, budgeting framework discussion up a little bit, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is a big contributor to derailing budgets? Like again, back to underestimating legacy systems and the impact it has on workflows. Anything else there that we haven't, you feel like you could lean in on?
I don't know. I guess I would say not really looking at the budget and planning for a 3 to 7 year plan, right? And taking those line items or the outcomes, right, and figuring out where am I going to be 3 to 7 years. I see so many times it's just 12 months. That's all the thought that goes into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. You see that time and time again, and you get to the end of the year and it's like, we don't have the money to spend on this. Well, there's certain things that happen next year and the following year, just from a life cycle refresh that you need to address. And so then what happens, that stuff gets piled on, and that's a lot of the customers that we see that have that significant technical debt is because they never had the plan, where they were looking at 12 months and it's like, okay, we can just shove that into the future and pretend it goes away. Well, it doesn't go away. And so then you're just compounding the problem by not having, that the whole framework, having that budget, adhering to it, and making sure you're investing wisely.
Well, yeah, because a lot of these organizations that we work with, they do have long-term strategic plans and visions. Mm-hmm. So why is technology not part of that, right? Like we keep saying, technology is foundational to everything that they're doing, including their long-term strategic visions. Mm-hmm. So getting that part of it and tightly integrated is super important.
And it changes. Like what was said, be flexible. It changes faster than a lot of things, right? A manufacturing food plant usually that part of the manufacturing process changes much slower than technology.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay too when you're looking at budget. Like they can change throughout the year. We go through, meet with customers quarterly basis or more frequently to kind of review the initiatives. Here's what we had on the plan. I can't think of a budget or a plan that we put in place for a year that we just executed just as is. There's always a time something new comes up there. We have to defer things. Decisions have to be made, but having a plan and making conscious decisions. So, hey, we're not going to do that this year. We don't have the money. Like, this isn't a big deal. This thing came up or whatever. It's in the next year. Now, everybody's aware of the decisions that were made, right? Those kind of things have to happen. They're operationally going to happen throughout the year. So just making sure you're looking at that, but in awareness of the big long-term context of those decisions.
Sure. So just move into kind of our last discussion point here. Really, can you give some tangible advice around how do we prioritize? So if we have to make some tough decisions because we don't necessarily we can't spend the money on everything that maybe surfaces itself in 1 year. Can you talk specifics around prioritization?
Is that me? You want me to speak?
Either one of you. Either one of you.
I can speak a little to it. It's kind of what we talked about before. It's just making sure you have the priority and making sure it's aligning with the business. Like that's the biggest thing, right? Does it still make sense to do what we were planning on doing? And having time to make those decisions. So like when you're putting together and priorities in that plan, it's not just we used to do this, here's the plan replacement when we move on. It's this is coming due, here's our alternatives. And that's a lot of the kind of the conversations that we'll have with our customers is like you can do it one of two ways, or here's some different options, like wow, what are the business plans are. So making sure at the core of it still needs to make sense for the business and be the right investment. So
I like the time thing. Sorry to interrupt, but I like the time thing you talk about, because a lot of times in small businesses, the budgeting process is not happening. It's happening at the end of the year. And if you start this process at the end of the year, the outcome and the how reliable your budget is and realistic it is probably going to be suffering a little bit if you try to jam this in at the back end of the year. I mean, what do you recommend with regards to how early you should start this process? What do we try to guide our clients? How do we try to guide them?
Well, when we start with our clients, we'll put in, and just again, the easiest thing to do is just making sure it's that the life cycle refresh. So making some decisions on how frequently we're refreshing the equipment that we have in there and the systems that they have. And having that on a plan is kind of not necessarily an action time, but that's a decision time, and we're leading up to those decision times. So we build one out kind of, it's up to like 7 years, depending on the infrastructure that they have. It may be a whole 7-year plan. Getting some of the software and some of those kind of things in there become a little bit more of a challenge, because a lot of those are just ongoing contracts that just have month to month. So making sure you have some, decision times in there. They may just, a lot of businesses, we have these conversations, they might not be happy with their ERP system. Well, let's put it on the roadmap. That's a decision to make. That's going to be a significant investment, but don't plan on doing it next quarter because it's going to take longer than that. So those kind of things that you have on that plan. But it's having it built out so you're addressing, and you have at least a year, I would say a 3-year minimum of here's kind of what's going on. And when you're looking at that and making those decisions, especially decisions to defer, you're aware of the context. I'm deferring it to next year. Well, what spend are we planning, or what systems are we going to have to address next year? What are we going to have to now? Is this going to cascade down? And now we're because we're not doing this, or we want to do something else first. That's going to impact decisions 2, 3, 4 years down, because those are going to come due too, and we're going to have to revisit what we're doing from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Troy, anything you like to add around prioritization, or even maybe talking specific around maybe some metrics that you honing in on that might help you prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I bring up is, what is the most important thing that if was removed from your business would be painful, right? And it's usually whatever their biggest source of revenue is. So, whether that's like we talked about manufacturing or sales or whatever, it's getting your arms around that business goal and what, is needed to achieve it. Whether it's your ERP or CRM, and, having some sort of way to measure. And is the issue that we're there because of pain, or is it because of concern for potential outage? And then those are kind of two different ways to impact. But you in both cases, you want to have an uptime measurement for a manufacturing, or you want to have some CSAT scores for customer experience and be able to measure, like, here's the pain, here's what we found, we need to change. We made the change. Did we see a significant improvement in that investment? Whether it could be, from a number of things, business intelligence, software, CSAT, whatever.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a question for you guys: as we engage with our clients and they maybe go through this evolutionary process of maybe just doing budgeting around the lifecycle management stuff, right? The must-haves, and then once we get our arms around that and get a good cadence going, and they understand the importance of that, do you see this evolution where they're now looking at, things like, hey, I want to look at maybe this most important thing. How do I reduce my exposure to risk associated with this element? I mean, do you see that happening with our clients as we start working with them?
Oh yeah, that stuff definitely comes up. And I would say kind of one thing, kind of speaking back to when we're building that plan, when we start with that infrastructure plan and just some of the regular life cycle stuff, it's easy to build on it. That'll strike things of like, oh, we're going to replace this. Well, I want to do this too. Like we'll have a lot of just like regular strategic recommendations of things in the business. Oh, it'd be nice if we could enable this. Well, it might not even be an IT thing specifically. They might not think of it as an IT thing. But IT has involvement in most things these days. Like somehow IT is probably interrelated with whatever those initiatives are, or could be, right? If it's not core to it. So making sure all of that stuff gets captured on the roadmap, and starting with, what we see is a lot of things. It just, business change, it takes a little while to make those business changes. And so collecting those ideas during those kind of brainstorming sessions, what would you like to do next year? Well, I got a couple devices. I need more security cameras. It would be nice if we had this telemetry on our forklifts. Well, what's holding that back? Well, wireless. Okay, now we have some technology supporting for those business changes. So those kind of things, they do happen, but it's having those conversations and understanding like what those business challenges are, like what's holding you back.
And I just want to
rest on there. Then IT, like how can IT help support that? There's so many things that IT can help support. Mm-hmm. That if you don't have that conversation, you don't know, you never will.
Yeah.
I just want to say the conversation, right? Our customers are lucky they have a VCIO like Bo that has those conversations. I often go into potential client meetings that they have an account manager from their partner that is just looking to refresh physical devices, and they're on commission. So are they having the conversations? Is their intent in the right place for the business? And, the way we do it with a VCIO and not a sales team at that engagement, I think is a benefit to our clients.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we're getting near the end of time here. Troy, can you just rip through the takeaways for us quickly?
Yeah, I mean, the first takeaway is remove the digital drag, all the noise, manual workflows before we start adding new tools, right? I think an explosion of new tools is inefficient, it's expensive, and it once you throw tools into an environment, they're hard to get out. So just having, doing that checkbox first. Thinking of your IT budget as a growth enabler for your business and not just outcomes on line items, right? Switching your mindset a little bit there is important. Having some sort of framework like the 5-step process Bo went through earlier, assessing posture, aligning to business goals, prioritizing for impact, staying flexible, right? And to develop a budget. Those are key to stick to those. And having a way to determine how you're going to measure ROI in this investment, right? If you add a new building or you expand, right, usually you're going to have an ROI on what that did for your business. It's the same thing with your IT spend. Have a way to measure your manufacturing or your ERP spend or CRM spend to determine if you got your money's worth.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And Bo, you have any closing thoughts?
No, not really. I don't know.
Okay. Well, thanks again, gentlemen, for joining us. I think this is a really good content in this conversation. So to wrap it up, I guess I'd leave on this statement: the success you seek in the future is dependent upon the IT decisions you make today. Think about that. It's very appropriate with our conversation we just had. So again, the success you seek in the future is dependent upon the IT decisions you make today. Thanks again for joining us on Unscripted with SST. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.